Are you happy with the state of our country? I'm not. I'm Rob Richardson, engineer, political activist, and advocate for change. I've spent the last 2 decades fighting for the average person. Disruption is not a compromise. Let's shake things up a bit, challenge the status quo, and focus on what's really important to you. Welcome to Disruption. Welcome to Disruption with Rob Richardson. I'm joined today by my co-host, David Singleton from the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. Today we're here to discuss the ongoing epidemic that has been really happening in our country for a long time, but now we have the technology to show it. The shooting of unarmed African-American men by police, and really talking about why this is happening and what we can do about it. When I think about everything that's happened really over the last 3 or 4 years, David, it's really hard for me just to put my head around. I think about Samuel DuBose, obviously, here recently, and his unjustified killing that happened. And we've had two tries to have a trial, and still we're not able to come to a result. And when you see that tape and you watch that first tape and you see it, you just can't understand how that happened. But it's not just him, of course. We have John Crawford, who was just at Walmart, literally shopping for a gun, which I believe we're allowed to do in this country. Mm-hmm. And there's a call saying someone's waving around a gun. He's a black man. The police show up while he's shopping and shoot him in the back. Mm-hmm. They're not pointing the gun at him. He has the gun because he's looking at it in the store. And he gets shot. And then we go back to TRAYVON Martin and think about a kid who is walking in his neighborhood and is killed because he has a hoodie and he's black. And so he's seen as a threat. And somehow they can't convict George Zimmerman, and it's clear that he was completely unjust. He wasn't even an officer. Mm-hmm. So there's not even that excuse that, okay, this is an officer who was trying to protect the neighborhood. This is somebody that tried to take the law into their own hands and got away with it, and it was justified. And it was said as if it was okay. And Tamir Rice, another child playing in the playground. And watching that tape, I remember watching that tape. It was one of the hardest things I've ever watched. And the officer pulls up and just gets out of the car and shoots him. This is a kid. It wasn't a threat to anybody. And there's no questions asked. And when I think about it, David, having a son, and then myself, I still get nervous when I get pulled over by officers to this day. Being, they won't know that I'm the chairman of the board or that I'm running for office. None of that is going to be relevant. What they will see is there's a black man behind the wheel, and by the grace of God, that could be me. And so I don't know, when I see this, I'm trying to figure out what can we do to go forward. Often, when we talk about this, some people say, well, there's a lot of people that are shot by police, but 34% of folks that are unarmed are black men, when we only make up 6% of the population. So clearly that disproportionate, those disproportionate facts show that we have an issue there. What do we do? Where do we go from here? What do you think?
That's such a hard question to answer, because what at core is going on here is the effect of racism and implicit bias in our society. And the stain of slavery and and poor race relations in this country ever since has infected, it's really infected all of us, but it certainly infected the officers who are involved in these shootings. They see you, they see me as a threat, first and foremost. And the excuse that they give is just,
I fear for my life.
I fear for my life. But when you look at, if John Crawford is a white man, does he get shot down like a dog?
No.
Does Tamir Rice, if he is a white boy, does he get shot down like a dog?
No.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we'll never know, because that's not what those facts were, but I suspect that they wouldn't have. And so we've really got to do a lot more, I think, to train around implicit bias and how it impacts people and impacts police officers. And I also think that the courts give officers way too much the benefit of the doubt. I mean,
agree.
and I get that they have a difficult job. My father was a police officer.
But you make a good point on that. I want to interrupt you a little bit on this because I don't understand as a lawyer. I always thought, okay, the claim they make about being afraid for their life, it was supposed to be a reasonable basis for that fear. It seems like that is not followed. It's just like, as long as they say, I fear for my life, then that is the reasonable standard. It doesn't have to, the circumstances surrounding it don't seem to matter. The evidence with the tape don't seem to matter. It's just that if an officer says he fears for his life, despite what the tape says, if you remember, there was always, when body cams came out, when this technology began to come out, people say, well, we're going to have the tape, we have the evidence, and then people will be able to see, and then we can clearly make the decision. It's not the case.
No, it's not. It's not. And some of it, though, is about juries. We need jury reform. We need to make sure that jurors are more representative of the community. Now, that doesn't solve the issue, because you could have more people of color on juries who get how police often abuse their power. All it takes is one juror.
All it takes is one
to say no, and there's not going to be a conviction. And I'm not going to criticize the jury system from that standpoint, because the flip side of that is
we need that.
We need that. And, if any one of us were ever on trial, we would certainly hope that we would get at least one juror to say no. And that's a very valuable check on the power of the government. That said, our jury system is in need of work. We need to find ways to broaden the pool. I think that we ought to have, folks who are getting public assistance ought to automatically be put into the jury pool mix, and not just have it be driver's license and voting.
Agreed.
Right?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
So I think we've got a real race problem, and we can point the finger, and
let's talk about that race problem a little bit, because you make a good point, and I'm going to quote you from something you said that you may not remember, but people often, when we talk about racism in this country, there's a retreat. No one wants to talk about it, and we're afraid to confront it. And that is the central issue. I truly believe that. If you look at what Germany did in terms of how their response was to the Holocaust, they don't hide from it. They don't pretend as if it didn't happen. They don't try to rewrite history. Everywhere you go, they point out that it happened.
That's right.
That's exactly what we should do here. We are doing the opposite, and we're playing this illusion when we say, well, we want to be colorblind. No, we don't. Because then you're blind to what's really happened.
Exactly.
We want to make sure we're aware and conscious of what is happening, and really see what has happened before and what is happening now and how it really affects us. When racism or conversations about it come up, we immediately want to retreat or attack, and no one wants to have the conversations because it's uncomfortable. And Americans are struggling. We're going in the opposite direction. If you look at, there are some states that are literally rewriting history. They're outlawing ethnic studies. They are defining how the Civil War happened, and they want to take slavery out of it. That was the reason. You can take the test. You can take a citizen's test, and it gives you, when you get into this country, it tells you, well, what were the reasons for the Civil War? They offer you a bunch of reasons. There was one reason. It was slavery.
Right.
And the fact that we are not able to have a really frank discussion, not even about slavery, but about what happened. What happened after slavery was brutal too. It was a brutal period, a really brutal period, that after the civil rights movement got enacted, we as a country said, okay, we did this, let's pretend like it never happened. And then we thought that would solve the problem.
Yeah, well, you're so right about the way we don't want to have the conversation. And unfortunately, there are too many people, if you do start to try and have the conversation, you'll say, you're playing the race card. I don't know how many times when I've written something, an op-ed in the Inquirer where I've talked about racial issues, there'll be at least some comments that say, you're playing the race card. And no, I'm not.
No.
And don't try and silence me with those words. That's a way to silence conversation, not a way to engage in it. And
you make that point on the reverse end too. I want to make sure that that's pointed out too, because you bring up the point that just calling people racist doesn't help either, right? Because that shuts down the conversation as well.
That's right.
Just as on the other side, if you just say, "Well, I'm colorblind," that shuts you down. That shuts down the conversation as well. We have to engage in the conversation.
We've got to do it constructively. Calling people racist doesn't. Now, if somebody there are there are racists.
There are racists. Yes, we should say that.
But
they're all over now.
I really do believe that most people are good people. I really do. I couldn't do the work I do if I didn't believe that. And I think that most people, if we could just have conversations, we could see what we have in common with each other. And we could also be open to the fact that we have different perspectives, and those perspectives are unfortunately skewed by our racial history in this country. And I want to figure out how we can have more of those conversations. And I guess the part of the good news in all this tragedy around these shootings is that we are having more of these conversations. Sure. It's just still not doing enough to solve the problem and stop these shootings.
Yeah, so let's, I completely agree. And if you look at what's going on at a national level, we have an attorney general who is trying to take us way back. And I don't think it could be overstated how dangerous Jeff Sessions is as the Attorney General of the United States. It's very scary, the things he's doing. If you could, I know about some of them, but you probably know better than me. Talk about what's going on there and why that actually matters to people.
Well, the most significant thing that Attorney General Sessions is doing with regard to police issues is his office is trying to figure out ways to get out of agreements that cities have entered into with the Justice Department to transform policing. And to make sure that the reforms that have been put in place in many cities to address police abuses, to like the Cincinnati agreement. I don't think he's going to be able to get our city to take some steps backwards, but I'm concerned about that. Yeah, he doesn't. And there's other things. I mean, he wants to. And this is not related to the policing so much, but he wants to make sure that when somebody is charged federally, that they get charged with the most serious offense. Basically, he wants to bring back mandatory minimum times for people, and that's going to swell the prison population back up and create more tensions and destroy communities. And so that's dangerous. And for anybody who doesn't think that elections matter, they matter. They matter. They matter. You got to vote. You got
to vote in every election.
Every single election. And I love my brothers and sisters and allies who are out marching and protesting. That's great. But vote.
Vote. You bring up such a good point. What really has frustrated me about that is that the protest is not often connected to policy, to voting. And some even get upset when you bring it up. Well, I don't want to vote. Like, well, what are you doing here? You're going to protest and go away. That's part of the process. It's not the only thing. Right. There's advocacy after, there's following up, there's pushing. All of those are connected, but you can't take voting out of it. And so why we should care about all this is that we as a society, if we don't get this right and communities can't trust police, we're going to have more dysfunction. It's going to be harder for us to work together. It's going to be harder for us to trust one another. And it's harder to have a democracy at that point.
That's right. And it's going to be harder for the police officers to do their jobs.
It's going to be harder for police officers to do their jobs.
And I think you and I will both agree that police officers do have a very difficult job to do. They put their lives on the line. It's risky. It's hard work. It's important work. And so if we care about protecting police officers, which we should care about, of course, then we've got to figure out how to have these conversations.
Well, as I say often, I support law enforcement, and I also support holding bad officers accountable that abuse their authority and break the law.
That's right.
They have to be held accountable and actually held to a higher standard because they serve us. Period.
That's right. And on keeping officers accountable, holding them accountable, I mean, part of the problem is that fellow officers won't do that. No. And, the blue wall of silence comes into play where they stand together and they need to be talking, reporting officers who break the law and abuse their power. They need to do that.
I want to take a look at the Philando Castile video, and we're going to play that, talk about it, and then conclude afterwards.
You have your license and insurance?
Sir, I have to tell you, I do have a firearm on me.
Don't reach for it then. Don't pull it out.
I'm not pulling it
out. Don't pull it out.
You just killed my boy. That wasn't me. He wasn't me.
Don't pull it out.
He wasn't.
Don't move.
Oh, man, I can't.
parade. Get the baby girl out of here.
You know, watching that tape was, I've seen, unfortunately, quite a few of these. This was really, really hard because when you look at this tape, and I've seen, there was another tape before this, I can't figure out what he could have done. There are other tapes out there where some people say people didn't comply, which non-compliance is not a death sentence either. Mm-hmm. But this is someone who literally did more than he needed to and was killed for it. And then somehow with this, he gets off not guilty. And what's even more frustrating is the NRA, the National Rifle Association. He's a card carrying member. He's got a firearm. It's legal. There's nothing from them. There's nothing from them. This is someone who has his Second Amendment rights. Supposedly, he's supposed to have it, and he doesn't have it. The fact that he had a gun and he was black is the only thing that makes any sense to me. He was executed. And you have an officer who was clearly fearful, overreacted, and killed him because he was afraid of him, even though he told him he had a gun and he was telling him so he can follow the law. None of that mattered. I don't understand what the jury saw in that.
I don't either, Rob. And I actually avoided watching the dash cam until just now, and that was just too much. I don't know what to say about that. I feel so bad for Mr. Castile and his family, for his girlfriend, for baby girl in the back.
In the car. Seeing your father executed.
And he did everything right. And it boggles the mind. I don't know what those jurors saw either. And it's just stunning. And, you know, the thing that I heard that really troubled me is the officer saying, well, I smelled marijuana, and I thought that if he could smoke marijuana in front of his 3-year-old, then he would have no regard for me, and that's why I was fearful. That's a load of crap, because the brain is not thinking like that in the moment. That's a
That's a justification
a justification after the fact, and you know if Mr. Castile was a white man who said, I've got a gun, and telling him that I've got a gun and he's complying with the concealed carry law there, is he get executed like that? Absolutely not. No. Absolutely not. And the NRA, they have no credibility.
None.
None. Period. Done.
None. We have to, this matters because law enforcement needs to be safe. We as people have to have faith in our law enforcement and in the criminal justice system. The system completely failed here. They failed. And we can do better. And this is a problem not for African Americans, but for all Americans. And I hope we all begin to see this, and we have to solve this problem. This cannot go on. This can't continue.
Agreed.
This cannot continue. I want to thank you for coming on the show. I want to thank all the listeners and viewers of this show. Disruption with Rob Richardson, David Singleton. Thank you as always.
Thank you. Good to see you.